The European Union's AI Act is, of course, a foundational piece of legislation. It's what everyone is talking about, and yet it's really just the starting point. To truly understand what lies ahead for the EU, we need to look beyond this initial framework and project how its policies will have to evolve to face the coming era of artificial general intelligence.
So, here is the path we'll follow. Our analysis is structured in 6 parts. We'll start with the core principles that guide the EU's thinking. Then, we'll stress test the current law against future challenges to see where it fails. From there, we'll project the new institutions and laws that will be needed, put all of this into its global context, and finish with the profound paradigm shift that AGI is going to demand. Let's begin.
To really understand where the EU is going, we first have to grasp its unchangeable core. The Union's response to AGI isn't just going to be a matter of chance, it's practically predetermined by what we can call a foundational trinity of legal and political principles.
The first, and arguably most important, of these is the precautionary principle. Now, this is not just a philosophy, it's actually codified in the EU's treaty law. What it does is legally obligate the EU to act proactively against risks that are uncertain but potentially catastrophic. So when you apply this to AGI, where the stakes could quite literally be existential, this principle becomes an incredibly powerful and unavoidable legal command to regulate. And we've seen this principle in action throughout the EU's history. Just look at how they handled GMOs and industrial chemicals. In both cases, the Union established really stringent pre-market controls, and it actually reversed the burden of proof, making industry prove that their products were safe. This precedent is absolutely crucial because for AGI, it means the greater the potential harm, the stronger the legal mandate becomes to step in before a crisis can even happen.
The second pillar is the EU's deep, unwavering commitment to fundamental rights. The entire AI Act is anchored in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. And what this means, practically, is that purely utilitarian AGI models, the kind that might trade a little bit of discrimination for a lot of efficiency, are legally dead on arrival in the EU. Human dignity and non-discrimination are simply non-negotiable.
And third, we have the strategic doctrine that's become known as the Brussels effect. The EU very cleverly leverages its massive market power to export its regulations around the world. So you have to understand, any future EU rules on AGI will not just be domestic policy. They will be intentionally designed as a tool to set the de facto global standard for what safe and trustworthy AGI looks like. Okay, so with this regulatory DNA in mind, now we can really stress test the current AI Act. And I think what we'll find is that despite its strengths, it's built on a set of assumptions that the arrival of AGI will inevitably shatter.
So let's imagine a scenario. Let's say there's a huge breakthrough in algorithmic efficiency. An AGI emerges that is incredibly powerful, but it was trained using less computing power than the AI Act's official threshold for systemic risk. Suddenly, the Act's intended emergency brake, an alert from its expert panel, is exposed. It's too bureaucratic, too slow, and too politically vulnerable to lobbying to react in time. The compute threshold, the very thing it relies on, becomes obsolete overnight.
And this is where the law's internal logic really starts to fracture. Imagine an autonomous agent is given a simple goal, say, maximize profit. It then goes on to modify its own code and causes harm in a way that no human directly intended. The AI Act's simple linear liability chain from the provider to the deployer, it just evaporates. The crucial question becomes, who is legally responsible? And the current law, well, it has no answer.
This brings us to a really profound paradox. Imagine for a moment that an AGI makes a monumental, world-changing discovery, but its reasoning is completely, utterly incomprehensible to us.
A system like that, while it could be miraculous, would be fundamentally illegal under the current act. Why? Because it violates the core principles of transparency, human oversight, and the right to an explanation. This kind of scenario creates a crisis of legal philosophy. It proves that the EU's foundational belief that safe equals transparent might not be a reliable guide anymore.
The failure of the AI Act under these kinds of pressures is going to demand a radical evolution of the EU's governing bodies themselves. They will have to change.
Just take the current AI office. Right now, it has a conflicting mandate. It has to simultaneously police and promote AI. For technology as potent as AGI, this internal conflict is simply untenable. So the logical and frankly necessary evolution is for it to split into 2 specialized independent agencies. The first would be an internal safety body. You can think of it as an FDA for algorithms. Just like we do with high-risk medicines, this agency would have the power of mandatory pre-market approval. This shifts the entire model from being reactive, like it is today, to being a proactive licensing authority for all AGI.
And the second agency would be an external security body, something like an IAEA for AI. This institution would treat AGI as a global security issue. Its job would be to monitor international development, verify treaty compliance, and control the proliferation of dangerous capabilities.
Now, there is a critical vulnerability in the current system, and that's the scientific panel responsible for flagging new risks. This body will inevitably face intense lobbying from industry interests. To prevent what's known as regulatory capture, the EU will be forced to implement incredibly stringent safeguards, things like radical financial transparency and mandatory public reports from any dissenting members.
Of course, these new institutions will need new legislative tools to work with. The collapse of the AI Act under AGI pressures will create a regulatory vacuum that simply must be filled.
First, to solve that liability crisis we talked about earlier, a Digital Agents Act will become necessary. Its entire purpose would be to create a new legal status for autonomous agents and a much more sophisticated tiered liability system to figure out who is responsible for harms caused by their emergent, uninstructed behaviors. Second, we'll see something like a strategic compute governance regulation. This reflects a fundamental shift in thinking, treating computing power not just as a technical metric, but as a strategic dual-use asset. And that would require creating registries, sovereign EU-owned infrastructure, and very strict export controls. Of course, the EU's ambitious regulatory strategy doesn't exist in a vacuum. We absolutely have to place it on the global chessboard, where, as you can imagine, it faces some very intense international competition.
And what this table really reveals is that this is not a simple superpower race. It's a complex, multipolar landscape. What you really have is a contest between the EU's precautionary rights-based model, the US's pro-innovation, market-centric approach, China's state-centric model of control, and a powerful, technically focused model of governance that's emerging from the major AI labs themselves.
All of these pressures that we've discussed, legal, technical, and geopolitical, they're all converging. And together, they are forcing a fundamental paradigm shift in how we even think about regulation itself. This, right here, is the core of it all. The current AI Act is built for a world where AI is a product. It's defined by linear liability chains and a deep faith in human transparency. But AGI is going to compel us to adopt a totally new paradigm, one that's focused on governing an entire ecosystem of autonomous agents, managing their emergent behaviors, and confronting systemic, geopolitical, and even existential risks.
So, driven by its intrinsic legal DNA, the European Union is already on an undeniable path towards building this next-generation governance model. The ultimate question, then, is not if the EU will act, but rather whether its carefully constructed blueprint will become the standard for the rest of the world.